a Noble Media Group member.
America's known our share of tyrants. In response to tyranny, we created one of the greatest guiding documents ever written by mankind. We stood for what was right. We've also made mistakes, but we corrected those mistakes by fighting for what was right both inside our borders and beyond. Today, America faces another challenge: Christian nationalism. Misguided faith and misguided patriotism justifying misguided deeds.
Would turn the hearts of those who are in power and position to make decisions.
That process, circle, breach the line.
That's not who we are, America. The Constitution is as true today as the day it was ratified. America stands for freedom, and America stands for doing what's right. And it's time we start restoring the American dream. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Restoring the American Dream. It's Brian Mistro. I'm here with Michael Faulkner and Aaron Astor. And we've got what's going to be, I think, a little bit of a controversial discussion tonight. It's certainly going to be something that will raise eyebrows, especially right now in this country. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm gonna let you hand it over. I'm going to give it to you, Michael, because this is your show, but we're going to have some fun with this, especially with what's happening right now. So I'll hand it over to you, Michael. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us tonight. And of course, we've got a guest. And Michael, it's all you, my friend.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Brian. And it's great to have Aaron here. But tonight we're going to be talking about freedom. What is freedom, and how does it intersect and overlap with the American dream? You see, we talk a lot about freedom and the American dream, but we really, we as Americans, to be honest with you, we don't understand this generation and our culture right now. We don't really understand it, and all the talk about socialism versus democratic socialism versus capitalism and so forth. How does that all interact with freedom? But we're so excited. So that's the discussion that we're going to have. And we are super excited to have Aaron Astor here with us and on Restoring the American Dream for the first time. And it won't be the last time, but Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. And maybe you could give our audience a little bit of a background of kind of the kinds of things, because this is something that you do, but let's hear it.
Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, for having me on, and Brian, of course, for organizing this. I'm very excited. I am actually just now taking a position here as professor of history at Gettysburg College. I've been in Maryville College in East Tennessee for 19 years, and I'm an American historian. My focus is on the Civil War era, the 19th century, but I get really into the politics of the era. Certainly, questions of freedom are central to that moment. But I've been I've been a historian, American historian for over 20 years now, and
Wow.
So this is definitely a subject, and I've always been at a small liberal arts college, so I've always had a chance to teach outside of my sort of narrow specialty of the mid 19th century, and the questions of sort of the development of socialist movements throughout the 19th century, and then as they go into the 20th century of all their various iterations. That's always been an important element in American history, and certainly in any kind of discussion of what freedom actually means and for different people.
Wow.
I think we
Wow.
found the right person, Michael. What do you think?
We have indeed. In fact, I found a BFF. I mean, so a little bit since I was 8 years old, 9 years old, visited Gettysburg. Kids from Washington, D.C. have been interested, fascinated in Civil War. So that started my journey as a kid on this whole pathway for history. And Gettysburg is my
It's
favorite.
an amazing place.
Oh my goodness, it is just amazing. So I've been touring, the kind of the Gettysburg historical sites since I was a kid, and being here in Pennsylvania, haven't had a chance to get back. So anyway, to be continued on that front.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
But yeah, so the idea around freedom was something that I looked at, you think about the people who came, the settlers, the Europeans who came to this country, they came looking for freedom.
Mhm.
And
Right.
in looking for freedom, they were encroaching on somebody else's freedom. So just the whole theoretical, the topic of freedom is something that as Americans, we've got to get our arms around because,
Mhm.
as we talk about freedom, that is where the whole discussion of, freedom from government or freedom of government, it
Mm-hmm.
just becomes very, very nebulous. And, it's an important subject that to be honest, we just don't talk that much about it. We
Mm.
think everybody has the same definition, and we do not. We do not have the same definition or understanding about freedom. So it is important. But Aaron, maybe we could start by getting you as from a historical perspective. What is that whole idea of socialism versus capitalism, and kind of where did that start from a high level?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it comes from the history of industrial capitalism. I mean, it comes from, if you think about economic systems that changed over hundreds and hundreds of years. Way back in the day, there was feudalism, right? It was you had peasants and landlords, and basically you worked on the land, and in return, you weren't necessarily paid cash, but you were given a chance to live there and so on. And then that kind of system broke down over several hundred years in Western Europe, and was replaced by something that we know of generally as capitalism, where everything has sort of a monetary value. Wages, people work for monetary wages. Land can be bought and sold like real estate for cash. And the reason why we call it capitalism is, capitalism is like the head is sort of the engine that makes other things. So it's finance capitalism, it's technology, it's ideas and whatnot. And this idea was that you would invest in something and it would increase its value. And that all happens over a span of several hundred years. And England, Britain is certainly one of the first places where it really starts to take off. But when you add to that in the late 18th and early 19th century, industrialization, so which is of course, steam engines and everything's just dramatically more efficient. But what's happening is huge numbers of people are being thrown off their old way of life. They used to be a small carpenter or a cobbler, or they were a small farmer. And the new way of the economy, they sort of get shuffled away, shoved off
Mm.
of that old way of things. And so they have to either adjust to this new order, or they have to somehow make sense of it. And in the early 19th century, you saw all these ideas about how do we adjust to it? Can we all unite over one thing, or maybe for better wages or what have you? That's where this idea of socialism comes from. It starts to develop in the early 19th century, but the question then becomes what is it going to
Mm.
look like? Is it going to be done
Mm,
at the small
Mm-hmm.
local levels? You have a lot of these local communes. This guy, Robert Dale Owen, who was in England and then he went to Indiana, of all places. And they would establish these sort of like perfect communes where everybody shared in the work. And it may work or it may not work, but no one really got it to do much
Mm.
at a larger scale. So then these so-called socialists come along, and saying, well, no, 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 this is something that we can develop at a much larger level, that all of society could be, that all of economic production could be managed centrally, so people have equality and so on. A lot of the arguments from that point then turn on, how exactly do you get there? And along, of course, comes Karl Marx in the 1840s, and he
Mm-hmm.
writes, he has a series of economic essays, but then the Communist Manifesto in 1848, which he saw as responding to a huge economic crisis in Europe. I mean, there's famine and everything, and it gets, these revolutions and whatnot, they get crushed. But what he's arguing there is that it's inevitable that as history unfolds, that all of society is organized by these economic classes, and that the classes conflict with one another. And then as they clash, something new comes out of it. So he said, after feudalism comes capitalism, and after capitalism is going to come socialism. And it's as soon as the workers realize that what their places on this class structure, they will inevitably come together and rise up. And he insisted this was a scientific process. but it was clearly a very sort of romanticized kind of thing. And there were a lot of people who were very sort of caught up in that idea.
Right.
Um, and but it was, both in Europe and then increasingly, particularly among German immigrants to America, would start to push some of these ideas. But it never really seemed to take off. It never really seemed to take hold as much as the early socialists had hoped. And so that raised this other question of why, okay, so it seems to answer this question of there's too much wealth, that a small number of capitalists, as they make more profits, workers are getting pushed further and further down. And so, as they would argue, they were being enslaved by the capitalist owners. And so they would say that they needed to free. I mean, that's why Marx would say, you only thing you have to lose is your chains. But they were, the reality was that the economy was dynamic. Late 19th century with new technology, of course, land, there's lots of factors that go into why the economy was dynamic, and it did not necessarily result in this huge revolutionary upheaval. You had brief moments, 1871 in Paris, there was a few moments of it, but by and large, there was like a big safety valve, and people went to America, and they would go west, and they would go into more, it didn't really explode until the Russian Revolution.
So,
Yeah.
so let me
And
ask about that because when we talk about socialism, the first thing that pops into everybody's mind is it's bad, it's evil, it never works, and so forth. And Michael, you laid out, and I'd like to just share a slide real quick, and I'll read it for those that are just listening and not watching our program. But democratic socialism is government ownership of industries, redistribution of wealth,
Mhm.
expanded public services, and political democracy remains. And so, Michael, I've got to ask you, when you brought this up, is it compatible with American ideas? And so, I'd love to get your input on that.
Yeah, I think and I was gonna mention, based on what Aaron was saying, the monkey wrench in that whole economic paradigm in terms of socialism was chattel slavery. You
Mm,
see, because that really threw everything into a
mm,
tailspin. I mean, and once the cotton gin stepped on the scene, then you had the industrialization, the need, the drive for, and you had the antebellum South, and the economy there was totally different from the North and so forth. So America was this amalgamation of a lot of stuff, and it was being driven by capitalism and the lack of freedom and the on one part, but I think the ideas around freedom have driven Americans even more so than capital, and the need for capital.
mm,
The idea of what is freedom. We think in this country as amateur historians, we think the settlers or the Europeans came to this country looking for freedom. And indeed they were, but they were freeing a feudal system, right? And those largely, but there were two types of people, two classes of people that came here. There was the merchant class, or the wealthy class, and then were the workers, the indentured slaves, the indentured servants, the working class who was just like say, hey, I'll have a chance. I'll have my own land. I can grow my own food. I can do my own thing, Again, freedom, this whole
Right.
idea of freedom, So it's always been, I think it's at the heart of every American. The American dream is freedom. But what triggered me was the idea of freedom. Do we want freedom? We want,
mm,
and this move towards socialism is we believe somehow, that socialism will give us freedom from worry. We won't have to worry about
mm,
economic insecurities. We
Right.
won't have to worry about, health expenses. We won't have to worry about, and it's just not true because if you don't have an economic engine that can drive, that can ramp up the GDP to such a level to take care of everybody, and then it's like we as Americans, we will, I don't think we could ever buy into, the vast majority will never buy into the idea of taking care of people who can't take care of themselves.
Mm,
That idea that somebody can live off the government, it's just, I know I'm oversimplifying this,
right,
and
right.
it really, really, really is not fair to the conversation, but it is something that I think the whole idea of freedom and the American dream, and what do Americans dream about? What is the American dream? How do we restore the American dream, which this program is about, and can socialism do that?
Yeah.
Well, so I'd
I
like to share. I'd
uh,
like to share, if I can, just a slide real quickly for those that are watching. And what I've done for those, and you don't need to read all of the specifics and details of it. Let me just kind of throw out, and I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, okay, Michael? I think it make for some good discussion. But so I'm showing the world and the number of the countries that have either been part of the USSR, which communism is a force, a type of socialism, right? An extreme socialism. But and then I'm also showing, like in South America and so forth, countries that either currently or have been working through socialism, and so forth. So I'm gonna push back to the question, and because this is an American based, I mean, I know people watch us from other places, but um, has it ever worked? I mean, it's yes, this country uses some forms of socialism, and then I'm gonna throw this out to Aaron because technically the post office, isn't that socialism? The fire
well, better
is
example
the
is
fire
TVA.
department socialism? The police department socialism? I mean, are some of these Social Security? Is that not a form of socialism?
I think those are probably fallen within welfare capitalism. I think a better example of socialism in America is actually the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, because the
Hmm.
government actually built the electrical production, and to this
I didn't
day,
think about that. Yes.
yeah, to this day in Tennessee and in many parts of the Southeast, the power generation because private companies were not electrifying rural areas, and
Hmm.
so here was this centrally planned, and it's owned by the government, although it's technically the ratepayers, but it's not a private company, and it's but that's rare. And there were other. What's interesting about TVA is there were other attempts to copy it, and it failed. In fact, in the Columbia River Valley in the Northwest, they tried something. The Missouri River
Hmm.
Valley, they tried it. Even in India, Nehru, I mean, famously visited Norse Dam at one point to see, which is the first of the TVA dams in Tennessee, and wanted to import that idea. This idea of centrally planning, especially things like power generation, has always been very
Hmm.
appealing because it's a utility, right? I mean, it's something that everyone needs. It's sort
Everybody
of
uses it.
part of this basic. But it's and there's been mixed success. I mean, TVA, there's problems with it, but it's generally done quite well. But the problem is when it's Michael's point is a really good one. That at some point somebody has to produce the wealth. I mean, socialism can talk about the distribution of the wealth, but if you're going to actually produce the wealth, the examples of that happening are done by force, by the state. I mean, you think of the
Hmm.
Stalinists, the 5-year plans. This is a dramatically fast industrialization of the Soviet Union in the 1930s. Okay, so it was enough to eventually defeat the Nazis and win World War II, but at what cost? I mean, tens of millions of people
Right.
died, forced famine, forced in the gulags and everything. It was would we call that a success? I don't think any of us would. But and of course that's the method they then exported to the rest of Eastern Europe, and then as a power overseas, and then of course China as well. So it's there's always something very enticing about it, I think, in that it seemed to offer a way out of, they would use this words like exploitation, that you don't have the profit-driven exploitation of people. But what it never accounts for is the fact that a lot of people do in fact gain much from it, even if they're not at the top of it.
Hmm.
And that class structures are not always there are actually a lot more fluid and this is something that a lot of Marxists have always struggled with, is that, they'll refer to things as false consciousness, or superstructures. They would say things like religion, for example. They would say things that distract the masses, that distract the masses from their objective material class condition. And, after a while, like, come on, everything's a distraction, isn't it? I mean, at some point, you got to realize this is the life you have, and this is meaningful because this is how we live. And so
Well,
it's
well, I'm going to add to that too, because Margaret Thatcher famously said about socialism, she said, at some point you run out of other people's money.
exactly, you run out of other people's money, right? Right. So you
What a
can start off,
classic, classic
right.
comment. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, so you can start, but there's the balance there. I mean, I think in an American context, what I think is more interesting is if we look at, and I think this gets a little bit to how Michael was going at it too, which is that in the early phase of the early republic, you had essentially two visions of growth in this country. None of them I would call socialist necessarily, but if actually they definitely were not. But one of them was the Jeffersonian vision that everybody should small plot of land. Okay, that you redistribute, Louisiana Purchase, everybody has a small plot of land, a yeoman farmer, and he was very distrustful of big banks, Andrew Jackson too. They distrusted big corporations. They distrusted any sort of big institutions at all. Let everybody be self-sufficient. And to be honest, when emancipation happens at the end of the Civil War, the number one thing that newly freed African Americans wanted was their own land. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted to be self-sufficient on their own land. If they could make a profit by selling extra this or that, then great. But ultimately, what they wanted to be was left alone. This was the dream. This is what freedom meant for large numbers of people. And it meant the country was going to expand across the map, across the continent, because you had to have land to do it. But it was not necessarily promoting the most technological, efficient,
mm,
capital formation. The other vision is the Hamilton vision, and later on the Whig Henry Clay vision, which was that we should encourage business and technology, and banks are good, and that will and trade, and that this will ultimately bring higher wealth. And that's ultimately the capitalist vision. That is, I mean, it's the two come together, but that's largely triumphant. But there's always been this kind of suspicion of people having too much wealth, especially
Right.
if it seems that they didn't earn it with their own hands. If they paid somebody else to do, they invested in somebody else. So this, back to the Jefferson and Jackson days, there was always this kind of, skepticism of the big speculator type. That does not necessarily mean that they are socialists at all or agrarians, but it's that mentality that could certainly morph later on into well, who are the people that
mhm.
are exploiting us wage-wise? Well, it's the same damn group of people who are, exploiting us and making money while they don't work at all.
Yeah.
And you
Right.
see this
So,
all
so
through
I,
these
I'm
ones.
going to throw this back over to Michael. So we're coming in with the idea. Okay, so restoring the American dream. Does socialism have a place in this country for restoring the American dream? And I'm trying to pull up because I talked about this on our other show just the other day, and I'm gonna use some paraphrases because when we say socialism right now, Michael, the first thing that pops in my mind is the DSA, the
Right. Right.
Democrat Socialists of America. They want to abolish the Senate. They want to abolish Supreme Court. They want to get rid of. They want to abolish the Pentagon. They want completely open borders. They want to get rid of prisons. I mean, where the hell are these people even coming from with some of these
They're
ideas?
they're 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 a protest movement.
Yeah,
I don't
I
even
agree.
give them I don't give them the political credibility of even saying they're socialists. They're not. They're
It's
a
anarchism.
protest movement.
That sounds more
Yeah,
anarchism.
They're
yeah.
more anarchists, and I get it. I listen. I get it. It's a movement. It's getting traction. But I wish that some of the young people who are involved in that movement would really understand what they're saying and would get on board. So, but Brian, to your question, I think it's not it's not capitalism versus socialism, but the whole idea of freedom. Aaron was saying, for the freed slaves, the idea of the 40 acres and a mule, and we had it. We had restoration of this country in our sights. If the compromise of 1887 had not happened, it would have set this country on a trajectory, I believe, that would just blow our minds. However, we did the reversal. We set in Jim Crow. We had 100 years of this oppressive system that again continued to oppress a class or a race or a group of people in this country and prevent them from being actualizing the American dream. And anytime we do that, anytime as Americans we do that, we set ourselves back, we set the
Mhm.
nation back. And it's all about our country. We are set up on we were set upon I believe the idea of freedom. Now, I understand that there's no such thing as complete total freedom because I can't go into a movie theater and yell fire. I'm not free to yell fire
Right,
because
right,
why?
right,
I
right,
infringe upon
right.
other people's freedom, right? I can't, there are certain things that gets into the gun ownership and all of that stuff. How much freedom is good at the risk of infringing upon other people's freedom. However, the engine that drives us forward, that continues to have us pass down to our children this notion that all people are created equal and endowed from the creator with inalienable rights and human dignity. You see, that promotion, that's what keeps us moving forward, I believe.
Mhm.
That is that line from the Declaration is what keeps us moving forward. That's the inner workings of what makes us tick as a nation.
So
And I think, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to add to that. So we're entering a period right now, Michael and Aaron, of AI, and you're wondering what in the world does AI have to do with any of this? Well, it has a lot to do with it because I think there's going to be, well, there will be. I don't think there will be massive changes for this country and actually for the world over the next 10, 20 years. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because one of the proponents of universal income, as I recall, is actually Elon Musk, one of the leaders of AI, because what he sees happening is that everybody will live in an age of superabundance. And I'm going to put a real quick plug in. If everybody watching the show doesn't know what that is, we do a show twice a week called The Hinge of History, just on AI. It's completely apolitical. But I'm coming back. Why I'm bringing this up is does the United States government does our republic require or should it be required to take care of all of its people equally? Because if you say yes to that, and I'm being a devil's advocate, if you say yes to that, how can you not be a proponent for socialism?
Depends what you mean by
Right.
taking care of.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
So right now we've got some massive disparities in income. We've got unemployment. If you're a college grad under 25, God forbid you have a comp sci degree. We won't even go there right now. But if you're under
Mhm.
25, the unemployment is over 10%. You can't afford the now average age of somebody buying a new home is 40 years old. So would
Yeah.
socialism, and we've only got like 2 minutes left, so we're gonna have to make it real quick. But I'll start with you, Michael. Then we'll bounce off of Aaron. Would socialism not equal some of that out? Take from the
No,
rich, give to the
absolutely
poor?
not. Absolutely not. I don't believe I'm a market-driven capitalist, but the market, free market is not free. Free market does not guarantee freedom. Markets need to be controlled and they need to be managed, and there needs to be equitable, fair treatment of workers. And all of that requires oversight, but it can't be a state-run oversight. In other words, the
Mm.
republic, the system of government that we have, where we elect those who do that kind of oversight or give that kind of oversight, and we can vote them in or vote them out, has to stay prevalent.
All right. So Aaron, in 1 minute or less, uh,
Yeah.
would socialism not balance this out? Would it? Would it?
I
Would
think
it
so. I
not
think
be?
that
Would
I think
that?
that's I think that's the appeal. People look to it to balance those things out, because they are products of. You hear people talk about late capitalism and so on. But I agree with Michael. I don't think it actually would do it, and nor that I think that
Hmm.
it would create much in the way of happiness, because it would, well, create another bureaucracy that makes these kinds of choices for people. There are some examples of certainly of where large government services work, but there's a point at which it starts to discourage any kind of capital investment, and I think the Elon Musk example is interesting because, I think of the movie Wall-E. Remember the movie Wall-E, where
Right.
everybody's just sort of, it's this dystopian future thing where everybody sits back and gets literally
They're all in the
fat, and
spaceship, and
yeah, it
they
does
have to get
nothing.
away from Earth because
And
it's, yeah.
and it's a dystopia because it seems like, oh, you've got everything, but you didn't work for it. And there's something, I I think there's a sense of self-actualization that comes with freedom. And I think Michael's right to emphasize that freedom means not just that you are given stuff. I mean, it may be that you are given a bare minimum. I think you can agree that there's basic acceptance, for example, no one gets turned away from the emergency room. That wasn't always the case. That is the case now, and I think
Mhm.
very few people would give that up. But there's a point at which, if it's there's too much that it gets in the way of the chance for people to have opportunities to make the better of themselves. I think ultimately equality of opportunity is the sort of sweet spot that we're after. That's just why we emphasize education so much. We emphasize the chances for people to get ahead. The extent to which other structural factors make that hard. That's where our debates are. Socialism, I think, is kind of a shot in the dark at sort of maybe the whole system needs to be altered. I personally think that's misguided, but I understand where it's coming from,
So
especially
my
when you look at things. Oh,
JD Rockefeller said, "We owe nothing. We owe no one a living, but we owe everyone an opportunity to make a living."
No, that's
yeah,
nice. So,
well
so
said.
You know,
we've got to shut it down. We're past our time. I tell you what we should talk about next time, Michael. Then what is America's role in this?
mm,
What is the country's role in supporting its citizens? And that'll make a hell of a good debate next time because you know what? It's it that right now that question is
we're
being
there.
asked right
Yep,
now
We're there.
across all the
That's right.
we have
political
for a long
parties.
time.
Yes.
That's right.
Everyone,
That's
if
right.
you're watching this, thank you for joining us. I don't know if you're watching it on X or Twitch or YouTube, but please take a moment and subscribe to us. If you go to YouTube, it's at No Bull Media Group. You'll be able to watch this. You'll be able to watch The Hinge of History, which I've already said is a completely apolitical show where we have experts, and Joe Carbon literally travels the world and talking about this and about AI. Of course, we've got Michael's show, Restoring the American Dream, which he does a really fantastic job in deep diving subjects like he's done today. And we're going to have a lot more fun on this one on Thursday, too, by the way. You've got the political arena where we get down and dirty into politics, and Thursday Thoughts, where we take something that's nonpartisan and how can we make America better. We are going to be adding more shows. We are. It looks like we have some wonderful people that will be joining us, and I can't announce it yet, but it is happening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Aaron. We'll be back, and we will see you again here in a couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been watching Reverend Michael's Restoring the American Dream. The No Bull Media Group is on all major social media platforms. Make sure to give us a follow so you can watch this show and many others.
A No Bull Media Group member.